We've been waiting for you." These are words that echo differently when they come out of mouths that shouldn't be there. The September sun beat down the dry land as Thomas Mitchell stepped off his horse in front of the barn he had just bought. He had worked 3 years in the silver mines of Colorado to save enough money to finally have a piece of land of his own. The barn was on the outskirts of Cedar Creek, a town too small to have secrets, too big for everyone to know each other. It was exactly what he needed, a place to start over away from the ghosts that had haunted him since the war. The wood of the barn was faded by time and the constant wind that swept through that region. The planks creaked softly, as if whispering stories Thomas didn't know yet. He had bought the property from a man named Jeremiah Stone, who had left for the east without giving much explanation. The price had been too good to question, and Thomas had learned not to look present in the mouth when life gave him a chance. The interior of the barn was plunged into a golden gloom, where particles of dust danced in the sun's rays that entered through the cracks in the wood. The smell was familiar: old hay, parched wood, and something else he couldn't identify. Thomas walked slowly, his footsteps echoing in the empty space, when he realized he was not alone. 5 women slept at the bottom of the barn, leaning back against bales of hay. They were all tall, imposing even in their sleep, with wedding dresses that had seen better days. The fabrics were yellowed by time, but still maintained a certain dignity. Each held a small bouquet of dried flowers, as if they had fallen asleep in the middle of a ceremony that never ended. Thomas felt a shiver run down his spine. There was something wrong there, something that her mind tried to process but couldn't accept. The women breathed slowly, deeply, as if immersed in a sleep that lasts a long time. Their faces were serene, almost angelic, but there was a pallor about them that didn't seem natural. When he approached to check if they were okay, the first woman opened her eyes. They were eyes as blue as the winter sky, cold and distant. She looked straight at Thomas and smiled, a smile that should be comforting, but that made his blood run cold in her veins. "We've been waiting for you," she said, and her voice echoed in the barn like a distant bell. One by one, the other women woke up, all with the same serene smile, all with eyes that seemed to see through him. They rose with unearthly grace, their wedding dresses rustling in the silence of the barn. Thomas instinctively retreated, his right hand automatically searching for the gun in his holster. "Who are you?" Thomas managed to ask, though his voice came out hoarser than he would have liked. The second woman, a brunette with long, straight hair, tilted her head slightly. "We are Jeremiah Stone's brides. He promised us in marriage one by one over the years, but Jeremiah had a weak heart to keep promises." Thomas felt the world swirl slightly around him. Jeremiah Stone, the man who had sold her the property, had mentioned that he was leaving to start a new life. He had not spoken of brides, much less of 5 of them sleeping in his barn. The third woman, blonde as ripe wheat, stepped forward. "He left us here, sleeping, waiting for someone to come and wake us up. He said that when the right man arrived, we would know right away." Thomas's heart was pounding in his chest. There was something deeply disturbing about that situation, something that defied everything he believed was possible. The women moved with a strange synchrony, as if they were parts of the same being, and their eyes never ceased to stare at him. "How long have you been here?" Thomas asked, trying to keep his voice steady. The fourth woman, with hair as red as the fire of the sunset, smiled wistfully. "Time is a strange word for those who sleep dreaming of a love that never comes. Jeremiah promised us marriage, but when the moment of truth came, he always found an excuse. An urgent business, an unexpected trip, a problem that needed to be solved first." The fifth woman, the tallest of all, with hair as dark as the moonless night, added, "Until one day he gave us something to drink. He said it was to calm our nerves before the ceremony. We drank trusting him, and then we only remember sleeping and dreaming." Thomas felt a knot form in his stomach. The story he was hearing was impossible, but here they were, 5 women who should have been dead for years, standing before him as if time had not passed. The wind blew stronger outside, causing the barn to creak. The dust particles continued to dance in the sun's rays, and Thomas had the strange feeling that he was being watched by something much larger than those 5 women, something he had been waiting patiently for a long time. "What now?" Thomas asked, though he was afraid of the answer. The 5 women looked at each other and smiled together, a smile that carried centuries of hope and a patience that only the dead know. "Now," said the first woman, "you choose. There are choices that a man makes with his mind and others that his heart makes for him." Thomas Mitchell discovered that some decisions belong to neither one nor the other, but to something much deeper and older. The silence that followed the women's question weighed in the air like molten lead. Thomas felt the sweat run down his forehead, mixing with the dust that had accumulated during the trip. The 5 brides stood motionless, their white dresses contrasting with the dark wood of the barn, like apparitions from a dream that refused to end. The first woman, the one with ice-blue eyes, stepped forward. His bare feet made no noise on the dirt floor. "Jeremiah told us about you before he left. He said that a man would come, a man who bears the scars of war and seeks peace in a land that knows no rest." Thomas swallowed. How could Jeremiah Stone know about him? They met only once at a tavern on Cedar Creek, where they closed the property deal with a handshake and 2 glasses of whiskey. He hadn't talked about the war, about the sleepless nights, about the faces that still haunted him. The second woman, the brunette, tilted her head like a curious bird. "He said you lost someone special, a woman who was waiting for you when you came back from battle, but who didn't have enough patience to wait until the end." Thomas's heart almost stopped. Margaret. How could these women know about Margaret? She had married another man while he was at war, tired of waiting for letters that arrived rarer and rarer, tired of not knowing if he would come back alive or dead. The third woman, the blonde, smiled with a sadness that seemed eternal. "Jeremiah told us that you would understand our situation, that he would know what it means to wait for someone who may never arrive." Thomas stepped back a few steps, feeling his back touch a barn beam. The wood was warm from the day's sun, but the touch brought no consolation. His mind struggled to find a logical explanation for what was happening, but logic seemed to have abandoned that place along with Jeremiah Stone. The 4th woman, the redhead, raised her bouquet of dried flowers. The petals fell slowly to the ground like tears dried by time. "We hoped, Thomas Mitchell. We waited as the world changed outside this barn. We waited as Cedar Creek grew and others came and went. We waited because that's what we were promised, that someone would come." The 5th woman, the tallest, approached slowly. His dark eyes seemed to reflect all the lonely nights Thomas had spent since he had returned from the war. Jeremiah was a man of many words and few actions. He promised eternal love to each of us, but when the moment of truth came, he always found an excuse to postpone what he had sworn to. Thomas tried to organize his thoughts. There was something wrong with the whole situation, something that went beyond the supernatural. The women's clothes, although faded, did not appear to be decades old. Their faces, despite their pallor, showed no signs of aging. It was as if time had stopped for them the moment they fell asleep. "What kind of drink did Jeremiah give you?" Thomas asked, trying to understand the nature of what he was facing. The first woman smiled, but there was something sinister about that smile. A drink that promised sleep without nightmares, endless rest. He said that when we woke up, it would be with the man who would really deserve us. Thomas felt a shiver run down his spine. He had heard stories about strange potions and elixirs during his years in the mines, products that Indians and local healers sold to desperate men. Some of these stories spoke of drinks that could put a person to sleep for years, keeping the body preserved as if they were just napping. The second woman held out her hand in Thomas's direction. His fingers were long and pale, like polished ivory. "You can choose us, Thomas. You can choose one of us to be your wife, and the others will go back to sleep until other men come to awaken them. Or," said the third woman, "you can choose all of us. Jeremiah told us that there were men who could love 5 women at the same time, men with hearts big enough to do so." Thomas shook his head, trying to push away the confusion that was taking over his thoughts. This is not natural. That's not right. The fourth woman laughed, a sound that echoed in the barn like distant bells. Natural, sure. Thomas Mitchell, you fought in a war where brothers killed brothers. He saw men die from causes that even they themselves did not fully understand. What is natural? What is right? The fifth woman added, Jeremiah told us that you would know how to recognize an opportunity when it appeared. 5 women who dedicated their lives to waiting for true love. 5 hearts that were never broken because they never had the chance to love completely. Thomas closed his eyes for a moment, trying to collect his thoughts. When she opened them again, the 5 women were closer together, forming a semicircle around her. There was no threat in his movements, only a quiet expectation that weighed in the air like the humidity before a storm. The wind outside increased in intensity, causing the barn to creak harder. Through the cracks in the wood, Thomas could see that the sun was beginning to set, tinting the sky with shades of orange and red that reminded him of the battlefield fire he was trying to forget. How much time do I have to decide? Thomas asked, though he knew it was an odd question for a situation that was already completely out of the ordinary. The 5 women looked at each other and smiled together as if they shared a secret that only they knew. All the time in the world, replied the first woman, or until the sun goes down completely. Thomas looked through a crack in the wall and saw that the golden disk of the sun was already touching the horizon. He didn't have much time to make a decision that would change his life forever, a choice between the impossible and the incomprehensible. And deep in his heart, a voice that sounded strangely like Jeremiah Stone's whispered that perhaps this was exactly the opportunity he had been unknowingly looking for. There is a time in every man's life when the impossible becomes the only truth left. For Thomas Mitchell, that moment came when the sun began to disappear behind the mountains and the 5 brides began to shine with a light that came from nowhere. The phenomenon started slowly, almost imperceptibly. A soft luminosity emanated from their skin, as if they had swallowed moonlight, and now it leaked through their pores. The wedding dresses, once yellowed by time, regained their original whiteness, radiating a purity that made Thomas's eyes sting when he tried to look straight ahead. The women remained motionless, but Thomas could feel something changing in the air around them. The barn, which moments before had smelled of old hay and parched wood, now carried the aroma of fresh flowers and spring rain. The sound of the wind outside subsided until it became just a distant whisper, as if the outside world had decided to stop to observe what was happening in that sacred space. Thomas tried to take a step back, but found that his feet seemed to be glued to the ground. It was not a physical force that held him there, but something much more subtle and powerful. It was as if his own memories kept him in place, reminding him of all the moments when he had wished for a second chance, an opportunity to rewrite the most painful pages of his history. The first woman raised her face toward him, and Thomas saw that her blue eyes now contained depths that seemed to extend to the center of the earth. In those pupils, he could see reflections of his own life, the boy who ran through the cornfields in Tennessee, the young soldier who went off to war full of ideals, the broken man who returned to find his house empty and his beloved married to another. The second woman bowed her head, and in her dark eyes Thomas saw the faces of all the comrades he had lost in the battle. They didn't seem to accuse him of having survived when they didn't. On the contrary, they smiled with the serene understanding of those who have found peace after much suffering. The other 3 women moved in perfect synchrony, approaching him like dancers in an invisible waltz. His bare feet barely touched the ground, and Thomas had the impression that they were floating on the beaten earth of the barn. The bouquets of dried flowers in his hands began to wither further, the petals falling and turning to golden dust before they even touched the ground. Thomas felt a strange pressure in his chest, as if something was trying to come out of him. It wasn't pain, but a sense of release he hadn't experienced in years. It was as if all the guilt he had carried since the war, all the sleepless nights thinking about what he could have done differently, were being sucked out of his body by an invisible force. The barn around them began to transform. The faded wooden walls had regained their original color, and Thomas could swear he heard the sound of hammers and saws, as if the building were being erected again before his eyes. The hay strewn across the floor rearranged itself into perfect bales, and a ladder he hadn't noticed before appeared leading to the second floor. The 5 women now came full circle around Thomas. He could feel the warmth emanating from their bodies, a warmth that was not physical, but emotional, as if all the hope they had held on for years of waiting was radiating toward him. Her hair moved as if submerged in water, flowing in slow, gravity-defying waves. Thomas closed his eyes and tried to understand what was happening to him. In her mind, she could hear Jeremiah Stone's voice, not as a memory, but as if the man were right there, whispering explanations that her waking conscience could never accept. Jeremiah had encountered these women over decades of traveling west. Each had been abandoned by men who had promised eternal love, but fled when the time came to fulfill their words. 5 broken hearts, 5 lives wasted by the cowardice of others. He had gathered them together with a promise that he would find someone who could truly love them, someone who understood the value of a second chance. The potion that Jeremiah had given them was not just to put them to sleep. It was to preserve them until the right man arrived, someone who had also lost his great love and understood the weight of loneliness. The barn was not just a shelter, it was a sacred place where time could be rewritten, where unhappy endings could turn into new beginnings. Thomas opened his eyes and saw that the 5 women were even closer. He could feel her breaths on his skin. He could see the small freckles on the redhead's face. He could count the blonde's golden eyelashes. They were not ghosts or apparitions. They were real women who had been preserved by something beyond their comprehension. The sun had completely disappeared behind the mountains, but the interior of the barn was bathed in a silvery light that seemed to come from the women themselves. Thomas realized that his breathing had synchronized with theirs, that his heart was beating in the same rhythm as the 5 hearts around him. He held out his right hand, the one that had held so many weapons during the war, the one that had trembled when he found Margaret's letter explaining why she could no longer wait for him. His fingers touched the first woman's face, and she smiled with such pure happiness that Thomas felt tears stream down her cheeks. Her skin was warm and real, not cold as he expected. It was the skin of a living woman, a woman who had waited patiently for someone who knew how to value her dedication. When he touched the others, one by one, he felt the same tangible reality, the same life pulsating beneath the surface. Thomas realized then that he was not being forced to choose. He was being asked to accept a gift that few men receive, the chance to turn loneliness into abundance, the opportunity to give and receive love on a scale that defied everything he had learned about relationships. The 5 women grew even closer, and Thomas felt he was about to make the most important decision of his life. The barn around them shone with a light that seemed to come from another world, and he knew there was no turning back after that moment. Outside, Cedar Creek slept under the stars, not suspecting that in a nearby barn the impossible was coming true for a man who had lost everything and now had the chance to gain much more than he had ever dreamed of. There are decisions that turn an ordinary man into legend, and Thomas Mitchell was about to discover that some legends are born not of violence or conquest, but of the courage to accept love when it presents itself in an impossible way. The moment of choice came like a silent lightning bolt. Thomas looked into the eyes of the 5 women and saw in them not only hope, but an ancient wisdom that spoke of infinite patience and unconditional forgiveness. They had waited for him without even knowing him, trusting in a promise made by a man who understood the value of second chances. Thomas held out both hands, simultaneously touching the faces of the first and second woman. The contact sent waves of heat through his body, as if it was touching the very essence of life. The other 3 approached, and he felt his hands rest gently on his shoulders and arms, creating a circle of connection that seemed to pulsate with energy of its own. In that moment, Thomas understood that Jeremiah Stone had left not out of cowardice, but out of wisdom. He had understood that he was not the right man for these extraordinary women. They needed someone who knew the pain of loss, someone who knew how to value what they had, because they had already experienced the emptiness of having nothing. The silvery light emanating from the women intensified, enveloping all of them in a luminous sphere that made the barn look like a sacred temple. Thomas felt memories that weren't his own flowing through his mind. Decades of quiet waiting, dreams shared between the 5 women, the hope renewed with each dawn that this would be the day someone would come to awaken them. The barn began to expand around them, the walls moving away until they disappeared completely. In place of the simple wooden construction, a large and cozy house emerged, with enough rooms for a large family, a spacious kitchen where the aroma of fresh bread was already beginning to spread, and a balcony that stretched towards the golden fields that were lost in the horizon. The 5 women were now smiling with a joy that made Thomas's heart overflow with emotion. He could feel their love flowing toward him, like rivers that finally met the sea. It was not a desperate or needy love, but a mature, patient love that had been refined by the years of waiting until it became something pure and incorruptible. Thomas noticed that his own clothes had changed. The simple traveller's attire was replaced by an elegant suit, as if he were preparing for 5 simultaneous weddings. On the women's fingers, golden rings shone with a light of their own, symbolizing unions that transcended the conventions of the ordinary world. The first woman, the one with eyes as blue as melting ice, came up and touched Thomas's face with a tenderness he hadn't felt since before the war. In his eyes, he saw the reflection of the man he could have been if life had taken different paths, the man he could still become if he accepted that impossible gift. The other 4 women positioned themselves around them, each representing a different facet of love: the compassion of the brunette, the joy of the blonde, the passion of the redhead, and the wisdom of the tallest. Together, they offered Thomas not only companionship, but the emotional completeness he had unknowingly sought all his life. Thomas closed his eyes and surrendered to that new reality. He felt his scars of war healing, not physically, but emotionally. The sleepless nights, the recurring nightmares, the guilt of having survived when others couldn't, all of this began to dissolve in the loving presence of those 5 extraordinary women. When she opened her eyes again, the sun was rising over the horizon, painting the sky with shades of pink and gold. But it wasn't the same sun that had set the night before. It was the sun of a new world, where the impossible had become every day, and where love had overcome all the limitations that the human mind insists on imposing. Thomas looked around and saw that he was no longer in the vicinity of Cedar Creek. The house where they now lived was in a green valley, surrounded by fertile fields and a stream that sang softly between the stones. It was a place that existed between the worlds, a piece of paradise reserved for those brave enough to accept miracles when they present themselves. The 5 women worked harmoniously around them, each contributing their unique talents to create a home that was so much more than the sum of its parts. They sang as they worked, their voices mingling in a melody that made the birds stop to listen and the flowers bloom out of season. Thomas realized that he had found not only love, but purpose. His mission now was to protect and honor those women who had waited so long for someone to value them. He had left for Cedar Creek in search of a simple, fresh start, and he had found a destination that surpassed his wildest dreams. In the years that followed, Thomas and his 5 wives became legends in the region. Travelers told of a mysterious family living in an enchanted valley, where love had overcome all conventional rules and created something new and beautiful. Some said they were ghosts, others that they were saints. Thomas knew that they were simply people who had found the courage to believe that the impossible is sometimes the only truth worth living. and every night before going to sleep, he silently thanked Jeremiah Stone, wherever he was, for recognizing that some gifts are too big for one person and that sometimes you have to pass them on to those who can really appreciate them. The barn where it all began was still there, in nearby Cedar Creek, waiting for the next lonely man who needed to discover that true love sometimes comes in ways that defy everything we thought we knew about life. If you enjoyed this Wild West story, don't forget to subscribe to our channel. We have many more fascinating narratives waiting for you. Activate the notification bell so you don't miss any adventure, and leave in the comments what type of story you would like to see next time.